opening lines of communication, aiming for central control and peace liberation. A spirited Sicilian defense immediately contests central space and promises an unbalanced, dynamic struggle where tactical skirmishes are likely. Establishing central presence and preparing to unleash nightly pressure across the board. Opening a diagonal for the queen's bishop and preparing to control the d4 square sets up a solid pawn structure. Opening the center like this invites a sharp battle for central space. Opening the c-file for potential pressure, black strategically exchanges material, simplifying the early position. Instantly establishing central dominance, this knight hops into a prime position, eyeing potential outpost squares and influencing crucial central squares for future kingside expansion. Developing the knight to c6 reinforces the center and prepares to challenge white's central pawn majority. Reinforcing the central pawn structure and preparing to develop the bishop, this move opens up avenues for further queenside expansion. A solidifying maneuver, this queen redeployment aims to bolster the e6 pawn and prepare for potential kingside castling. Developing this bishop to e3 bolsters control over the central squares and prepares for castling, while also supporting a potential pawn push to f4. Preventing b5 expansion locks down the queenside, a sensible territorial adjustment. Developing the bishop here strengthens the kingside and prepares for castling, securing the king while maintaining flexibility in the center. Developing the knight here aims to untangle the queenside and prepare for castling, freeing up the king. Castling securely tucks the king away, preparing to support central play and potentially launch a kingside assault later on. Instilling pressure on white's knight, black unpins their own bishop and prepares for potential tactical complications. Trading off the knight simplifies the position, opening lines for white's pieces and disrupting black's pawn structure. Doubling pawns on the b-file creates a structural weakness for the queen's side, but opens a vital diagonal for the bishop. Opening the bishop to a central diagonal, this aims to influence the queenside pawn structure and potentially target black's king. Challenging white's central pawn structure now opens critical lines, aiming to disrupt white's harmonious piece development. Opening the central files dramatically shifts the immediate battle, exposing king's safety and demanding precise calculation from both sides. Unlocking the central pawn structure, black aims to activate their queenside pieces and challenge white's central control. Challenging the pawn chain by placing the bishop on the open diagonal creates immediate attacking possibilities. Challenging white's bishop on d4, this piece aims to exploit the newly opened diagonal and potentially create a passed pawn threat. Sacrificing the bishop for pawn structure damage is a bold positional gamble to weaken black's queenside. Exposing the monarch through pawn structure deterioration is a risky gambit, creating permanent weaknesses. Unleashing the queen, white aims to exploit black's weakened kingside structure and the open g-file for a swift attack. Reorganizing pieces, black seeks to develop the king's bishop to a more active square, potentially preparing for a central pawn push. Securing space on the queenside prepares a potential queenside expansion or reinforces the pawn chain against any kingside adventurism. Asserting control of the open file aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and build attacking potential. Reclaiming the open e-file bolsters, attacking prospects, and prepares for pressure along the center. The king abandons its protective shelter, exposing a vulnerable avenue toward the center for potential future attacks. Targeting the weakened kingside, white dramatically escalates the pressure by threatening checkmate on the h-file and exploiting black's exposed monarch. Embracing chaos, black sacrifices material for initiative, aiming to dismantle white's pawn structure and expose the king. This probe on the queenside restricts black's counterplay and aims to create weaknesses. Disrupting white's pawn structure, black snatches an advanced pawn, creating immediate tactical imbalances and opening lines towards the enemy king. Reclaiming a central pawn after black's aggressive pawn grab, This knight maneuver aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and create new attacking possibilities. Embracing the bold pawn sacrifice, black aims to shatter white's pawn shield and open lines toward the king, setting a daring positional trap. Sharpening the pressure, white repositions the queen to bolster the kingside attack and control the critical e-file. Suddenly, black regains the bishop pair, forcing white to confront the spatial imbalance on the queen side. Reclaiming the open file offers a path to activity and increased pressure on black's weakened structure. Reasserting influence on the central dark squares, this retreat aims to protect the bishop and prepare for further queenside expansion. White reiterates the pressure on d5, aiming to exploit black's doubled pawns and weakened kingside. Trading queens simplifies things, offering a clear path to an endgame where black's doubled pawns might become a significant weakness. Transforming the pawn structure creates a powerful kingside pawn majority, but also exposes the monarch to future attacks. Unleashing the rook's might, black sacrifices material to pry open lines and expose white's vulnerable king. Securing the king is paramount, and bringing him to safety initiates a necessary defensive posture. Trading queens here streamlines the position, aiming to exploit white's doubled pawns and open the rook file for immediate pressure. Clearing the path for the rook, this repositions a piece to contest the now open file, a crucial step in this endgame. Unleashing the bishop to contest the h-file creates dynamic counterplay, though it might leave the king somewhat exposed. Shifting the king to safety seems paramount with so many pawns doubled and the center exposed. That king, now exposed on the open file, needs immediate shelter to avoid a swift attack. Securing a pawn advantage now might be tempting, but remember the king's exposed status, a critical vulnerability to exploit. Unleashing the rook into the weakened kingside, eyeing potential weaknesses and creating tactical complexity. Reclaiming the diagonal opens avenues for the bishop to pressure the kingside pawn structure. Consolidating the bishop's influence, this repositioning aims to secure the queenside and prepare for potential pawn pushes while keeping an eye on the central darkness. Asserting control over the queenside, this knight maneuvers towards a potentially decisive outpost. Consolidating the bishop's influence along the long diagonal now seems paramount for black. Unleashing the knight to d7 seizes control of key squares and prepares for an active role in the coming exchanges. Repositioning the bishop to c6 aims to secure it from knight attacks and potentially offer counterplay along the c-file. Repositioning the knight to a powerful outpost, pressuring black's disconnected pawn structure. Prying open the central files offers dynamic counterplay, potentially exposing the white king's sanctuary. Knight sacrifice targets the exposed black king, aiming to exploit the weakened pawn structure and open lines. King centralization now begins in earnest, seeking refuge from the gnawing white rook. Capturing the bishop opens up the king's defense, creating tactical opportunities on the weakened kingside. The king finds a temporary sanctuary, but white's knight stands poised to exploit the exposed kingside pawn structure. Seizing the rook on a6 offers a material advantage, simplifying the game towards a winning endgame for white. Attempting to salvage material with the rook, but the exposed king and fractured pawn structure create a grim outlook. The bishop's repositioning aims to control the crucial diagonal and potentially liberate the rook from its passive post. Restoring the pawn structure with the rook offers vital endgame defense. Converting material advantage now becomes the primary objective, forcing pawn weaknesses. Trading the bishop for the rook simplifies the position, aiming to exploit the exposed white king in the upcoming endgame. The monarch's journey across the battlefield finally offers a safe haven from immediate danger. The bishop seeks refuge on a square where it can eye the white king and support potential pawn pushes. Pawns are now locked, forcing a decisive pawn push to break the stalemate and create mating threats. Snapping up that advanced pawn is crucial, solidifying your now superior bishop pair and creating a formidable barrier. Simplifying the pawn structure to a favorable endgame is key now. Pawn advancement here is a desperate attempt to activate a dormant piece, though it leaves the king further exposed to attack. Securing the central pawn chain creates a more cohesive pawn structure, ready to advance. Embracing the open files now, the black king ventures forward to participate in the struggle, seeking active squares despite its inherent exposure. Unleashing a decisive pawn check clears the way, forcing the black king into an even more exposed position. The king bravely ventures into enemy territory, aiming to disrupt white's pawns and seek an active endgame role. Simplifying the position, white aims to improve the bishop's placement to pressure black's pawns. Reinforcing the pawn chain will be a struggle for black, but this pawn push offers some defensive potential. Gaining space on the queen side now, this bishop move prepares to contest the open files and potentially harass black's separated pawns. The bishop sacrifices itself to secure the pawn's advance and potentially disrupt white's king's safety, a bold gambit to reignite black's attack. Centralizing the bishop reclaims some influence on the queen side, preparing to contest open files. The pawn advances, seeking activity in a tense, yet simplified endgame landscape. Fortifying the bishop's post, white aims to restrict the pawn's advance and prepare for potential tactical skirmishes. Pushing the pawn forward injects life into the position, seeking counterplay and opening avenues for the king. Activating the bishop to support the pawn's advance will be key in the coming skirmishes. Black finally activates their isolated pawn, aiming to disrupt white's king's safety and create counterplay. The bishop retreats, eyeing potential infiltration squares as the pawn advances, a subtle repositioning for the coming storm. The bishop's repositioning subtly prepares to contest the open f-file, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure. This bishop maneuver reclaims outpost control, promising a swift assault on the exposed kingside pawns. Ignites the pawn's storm with fiving fire, creating counterplay and threatening the beleaguered king. Opening lines for your king feels incredibly risky now, don't you think? Pushing the passed pawn forward creates immediate pressure, forcing white to remain attentive to its advance. Securing the outpost with the bishop before advancing the pawns. Reorganizing the bishop to the center aims to create counterplay, but white's pawn structure is too solid. The bishop retreats, seeking better squares while black's pawns surge forward. Unleashing the passed pawn creates immediate, relentless pressure on white's compromised king. Stabilizing the bishop on the d7 outpost offers flexibility against black's advancing pawn. A desperate gamble, seeking to create attacking potential with a passed pawn before being overwhelmed. King activation is paramount. This cautious repositioning prepares to support the pawn advance and centralize its monarch. The king scrambles for safety, but the weakened kingside offers no solace. Unlocking the bishop's diagonal reignites pressure on black's vulnerable king position. Shifting the king to the queen side now prepares to support the pawn's advance and possibly contest the open file. Centering the bishop on d7 reinforces the pawn chain's advance and prepares for pawn promotion by supporting the d-pawn. The bishop now vacates the e6 square, preparing for a potential advance of the f-pawn. Shifting the bishop to c6 obstructs black's pawn advance and aims to control the central dark squares. Propping up the weakened kingside, this develops the bishop to a more active diagonal. Seizing the open file with the bishop stabilizes the central structure and prepares for further pawn advancement. Pushing the king forward aims to activate it and support the pawn on e4. This square secures the knight, but the pawn structure remains a significant weakness. Unlocking the king's potential often involves a calculated pawn sacrifice, and this maneuver aims to do just that, potentially creating open lines for the remaining pieces. Preserving the bishop's outpost on d5 offers a crucial defensive shield against black's advancing pawn storm. Seeking shelter and perhaps a decisive pawn breakthrough, the black king ventures into a precarious, exposed position. Targeting the pawn chain's weakness, the bishop aims to break black's defensive structure. Embracing the open file, the king seeks refuge, a desperate dash from the looming pawns. Sacrificing the bishop clears a path for your passed pawn, aiming to disrupt black's harmony. The black king, now exposed, succumbs to the relentless pawn chain and the encroaching bishop.